The first tremors registered at 2:17 Riyadh time. Not the blunt, singular spike of a falling rock but a jagged, recursive waveform that confused the software meant to classify seismic events. It hummed rather than cracked, as though something had lingered in the crust during entry. Riyadh's instruments spat red warnings. Doha's labs reported the same: too symmetrical to be natural, too slow for a meteor, too fast for tectonics. By the time Dr. Samira Al-Hadid's phone woke her, the media had already named it another meteor strike. The phrase felt insulting. Meteor strikes didn't leave harmonic overtones in the hertz range, and they didn't echo for minutes after the impact. 2 hours later, her convoy cut across the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. The desert was a sheet of salt and silence, broken by military transports that droned overhead in protective orbits. Heat shimmered off the sand in vertical sheets, though dawn had barely touched the horizon. Her team deployed a swarm of drones before they reached the crater. The feeds came back almost instantly. An object, half-buried, obsidian black, the size of a mid-rise building. It steamed against the sand as though cooling from some impossible temperature. Not smooth. Not metallic. Its surface writhed with microscopic motion, a billion microfissures healing and breaking like pores on skin. "It looks alive," muttered Youssef Marouf, the roboticist from the convoy. Samira said nothing. She rewound the feed frame by frame. The sand grains around the object were vibrating, not sliding, not collapsing, but vibrating as if they had become extensions of the mass. By the time the team reached the rim of the crater, the air itself buzzed. Her earpiece cracked and died, comms shredded by local interference. Soldiers cursed as their rifles misfired, ammunition counters flashing gibberish. The object flexed. Not visibly at first, more like the horizon bent around it, an optical ripple as if gravity had shifted a fraction of a degree sideways. Sand sloughed down its curved sides. "Back!" One soldier barked, waving them toward the vehicles. Samira's drone caught it, the unmistakable convulsion of something trapped beneath load, straining to stand. A limb or something limb-like pressed upward against the crust of sand. No joint. No clear anatomy. Just extrusion, matter choosing to reorganize itself. The ground pitched. Vehicles toppled like toys. Samira hit the sand, lungs empty, ribs aching. Her vision swam, but through the dust she saw the impossible. The object did not rise in the way a body does. It unfolded. It rejected gravity like an inconvenience, pushing against vectors no human eye could track. Sand cascaded in fountains around it. Soldiers opened fire, cracks of gunfire lost beneath a bass note that came not from the air but from the earth itself. And then the thing stood. Not balanced, not poised, but imposed upon the world as though physics was an afterthought. The crater hissed into silence. The object pushed itself free and rose against gravity. It wasn't rock. Under the morning glare, the black mass straightened into something with joints, long columns that bent, locked, then extended again like insect limbs refracted through geometry. Its surface no longer writhed. It was smooth now, matte black, but the air bent around it as though light itself was being nudged sideways. Samira's instruments screamed nonsense. Gravimeters registered local densities an order of magnitude higher than lead, yet the ground didn't collapse beneath it. Accelerometers showed the entity lighter than a truck, then heavier than a mountain, flipping values every second. She tried to recalibrate. The readings didn't stabilize. Youssef's voice cut through the chaos. "It's compensating. Rebalancing its inertia. Like a drunk relearning how to walk." The creature lurched forward, each step a recalculation. Its gait wasn't clumsy, it was iterative. Muscles weren't visible, but the limbs flexed as though thousands of biomechanical micro-decisions were happening mid-stride. Adaptive biomechanics. Learning in real time. The military acted fast. 3 tanks formed a firing line on the ridge, their cannons rotating in sync. Commanders barked in clipped Arabic through scrambled radios, gesturing toward the entity as it staggered across the sand. The first round hit square in what passed for a torso. The sound of impact was sharp, metallic, but the shell bounced. It didn't ricochet in the conventional sense. It slid away, trajectory kinked by some invisible curvature, embedding itself harmlessly into the dunes 2 kilometers away. The second and third shots never even touched. Their paths bent midair, arcing in ways that should have required megateslas of magnetism. The sand hissed in molten streaks where their energy dispersed. Samira saw it then. The space around the construct wasn't empty. Instruments caught faint shadows, invisible pockets tugging at sensors, like black holes measured in grams. Dark matter density pockets. Warping local physics just enough to twist trajectories, nullify impact, bend the rules. Keep firing, a commander screamed, but the tank's optics warped into static. One barrel sagged as if softened by heat, another detonated internally, shredding its crew. The entity did not retaliate. It simply continued forward, staggering, recalibrating. Its face, if it had one, turned toward nothing recognizable. The soldiers were gnats beneath its notice. Then the sandstorm hit. It didn't rise from weather. It rose from it. Grains levitated, suspended in turbulent vortices that obeyed no wind. Dust streamed upward, circling its form like a cocoon. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds, drones crashing into one another as compasses spun uselessly. Samira coughed into her sleeve, choking on sand. Through the haze she saw its silhouette blur, then fragment, then disappear entirely. Radars went blind. Infrared sensors showed a heat signature vanishing, not cooling, vanishing as though erased. When the storm cleared, there was only desert. The entity was gone. The crater should have been simple. A gouge of fused sand, a scatter of shrapnel, maybe a few isotopic oddities for graduate students to argue about. Instead, it was a scar that made no geological sense. No meteorites. No nickel-iron fragments. No telltale isotopic enrichment. The debris field was barren, except for glass. Samira crouched at the rim, visor HUD scrolling data. Quartz grains had melted, fused into glossy sheets that spiderwebbed across the desert floor. Not natural obsidian. When magnified, the structure revealed carbon lattices nested within the silica, recursive networks extending down to the nanometer scale. Patterns so tight they bent the microscope's resolution limit. "It's not glass," Youssef muttered beside her, adjusting his drone feed. "It's computation. Self-organizing logic gates." Layla Burricate knelt closer, gloved hand steady as she scraped residue from a blackened depression. The substance was viscous, clinging to the scalpel like tar. When she lifted it toward her nose, the team tensed. "Careful," Samira began. Layla sniffed. A sharp, metallic tang hit her sinuses, ozone after a lightning strike. Beneath it, unmistakable, the iron sweetness of blood. "It metabolizes," Layla whispered. "Something chemical. Something alive." The sample writhed in her vial. Not visibly, but the gel's meniscus trembled, pulling upward as if trying to escape containment. Before anyone could react, one of the soldiers posted at the crater's edge cried out. His boots were sinking. Not collapsing sand, softening glass. The fused surface beneath him sagged like stretched skin. He struggled, shouting as his rifle clattered to the ground. Samira and Youssef sprinted toward him, but the ground shivered. The glassy floor wasn't passive geology, it was responsive. The soldier's body dropped waist-deep in seconds, fused quartz flowing around him like a liquid trap. He screamed, voice breaking as the surface closed over his legs. "Cut him out," Youssef roared. Two more soldiers grabbed plasma cutters from their packs, igniting blue arcs across the surface. The glass resisted, flexing but refusing to fracture. Heat signatures bloomed on Samira's HUD. The material wasn't melting, it was redirecting thermal energy along its lattice, distributing the assault like a living circuit board. Layla's vial shattered in her hand. The hydrocarbon gel leapt free, splattering across the crater wall in tendrils. Each strand thickened, splitting like mitosis, creeping against gravity. The gel pulsed as if with a heartbeat. The trapped soldier's scream ended abruptly. His torso snapped downward with impossible force, spine folding, skull vanishing beneath the flowing quartz. Then silence. The fused ground flattened. No body. No trace. Samira stumbled back, heart hammering. The hydrocarbon tendrils froze mid-crawl, then shriveled, collapsing into inert dust as if their purpose was spent. She heard herself whisper, "This wasn't impact residue. The crater is part of it. Not spacecraft. Not probe. Something more primal. A mechanism older than design. Something that metabolized environment, rewrote geology, and treated human life as a passing input." At night, the desert should have been alive with noise. Insects, wind, engines from the perimeter convoy. Instead, the night pressed down like a tomb. Satellite feeds returned images of livestock scattered 20 kilometers to the north, desiccated in place. Sheep and camels collapsed mid-stride, hides drawn tight over skeletons. Their bones had imploded, not shattered, not broken. Imploded inward as though something had drained the marrow and let the frame fold into itself. Autopsies showed no trauma. No fluids. Just husk. Samira listened to static. All comm bands were void near the crater's perimeter. No radio, no telemetry, no GPS ping. Even analog signals, lasers, fiber, flickered into nothing once they crossed an invisible threshold. "It's not emitting," Youssef said, his voice brittle in the briefing tent. "It's subtracting. Think, interference patterns. Cancellation. Whatever it does, it leaves silence, not signal." He dragged seismic data onto the projector. Spidery lines jittered across the screen, faint but rhythmic. Underground pulses too regular to be tectonic. Too directed. "It burrows," Samira murmured. "No," Youssef corrected. "It interrogates. Mapping the crust. Testing load-bearing structures. Like a blind man tapping a cane." The floor trembled beneath their boots before anyone could argue. Instruments spiked. Then, nothing. All displays went dark. Generators sputtered out. Even the emergency fluorescents flickered into black. Silence. Not the absence of sound, the removal of it. Samira opened her mouth to breathe and realized she couldn't hear her own inhale. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs, but the sound never reached her ears. The soldiers panicked first. Weapons clattered in dead air, muzzles flashing useless light but no sound. The absence clawed at their nerves. Then came the vibrations. From beneath. From everywhere. The ground beneath the camp rippled as though the sand itself had become a diaphragm. Tents collapsed inward, sucked flat like lungs deflating. Men and women clawed for cover, but the sand betrayed them, shifting in waves that threw bodies skyward, then slammed them down. A soldier staggered past Samira, blood pouring from his nose. He opened his mouth in a scream that never formed. His chest caved inward as if the silence itself had reached inside and folded him like the livestock. Samira fell to her knees, hands pressed against the sand. She felt it, the vibrations weren't random. They pulsed in triplets, coded intervals like sonar, but deeper, geological. It wasn't sound. It was seismic language, pressure sculpted into signal. The entity wasn't just walking. It was running tests. Compressing, collapsing, extracting stress signatures from bone, from sand, from steel alike. A planetary biopsy. Youssef appeared at her side, pale, bleeding from his ears. He grabbed her wrist, pressed it to the ground. She felt another pattern, an inversion, canceling her heartbeat for a fraction of a second. Her chest seized. She gasped, vision tunneling. "Mapping us too," Youssef mouthed. The vibrations ceased. Just like that. The camp lay in ruins, twisted equipment, silent corpses, sand smoothed as if by floodwater. Then sound returned. All at once. The screams of survivors slammed into existence mid-breath, as though someone had unmuted the world. The silence was gone. The entity had already moved on. They seeded the desert with instruments. Seismometers buried shallow, deep wells drilled where the crust allowed it, arrays triangulated with precision usually reserved for nuclear treaty monitoring. The goal was crude, to turn the planet into a microphone to catch the footsteps of something that had no footsteps. The patterns came first as noise. Random compressions, half-second jolts that rattled glassware and tickled nerves. But the algorithms disagreed. Fourier transforms showed non-random clustering. Intervals repeating in prime number sequences. Spikes shaped like phonemes when graphed against each other. "Clicks," Layla whispered, hunched over the analysis console. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice barely audible under the generator's hum. "It's not language. It's palpation. Like a surgeon pressing veins, arteries, feeling for blockages." She highlighted a cluster. A series of compressions so regular they resembled syntax, punctuation by stress fracture. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Or maybe, Youssef muttered, it's both. Palpating and writing. Testing the planet's stress while recording the response. Outside the base, reports piled up. Villages on the Red Sea coast vanished into blackout. Herds slaughtered without wound. Missing persons with no tracks, no struggle, just absence. The scientists argued by lantern light, power grids collapsing in concentric waves around them. Samira held her ground. "It's indifferent. These are side effects, not intent." "Side effects that kill," Layla countered, slamming her palm against the desk. "If I puncture your artery while probing for a vein, do you call that indifference or murder?" The debate ended when the ground spoke. A seismic pulse hit the camp, not random, not environmental. It slammed upward through the crust like a hammer blow. Crates toppled. Instruments skittered across tables. Soldiers stumbled to their knees, clutching their stomachs. Samira's laptop screen spasmed, scrolling incomprehensible characters. Then stabilized. The waveform repeated, mapped across 3 seismometers miles apart. It was a sequence. Rhythmic. Structured. Jesus, Yusef whispered. It's teaching us. The ground bucked again harder. This time one of the soldiers screamed, though not from falling. His body convulsed, chest hammering as though struck from within. Seismic accelerometers spiked. His ribs cracked like kindling, snapping inward, blood erupting from his throat. The camp froze. Layla rushed forward, scanning him with portable ultrasound. The screen lit with distortions, bone marrow cavitating, muscles collapsing in patterned spasms. The seismic pulses were no longer confined to the crust. They'd hijacked his skeletal resonance. "Oh my God," she gasped. "It's using us. Bones as waveguides. Skeletons as part of its syntax." Another soldier fell, writhing, his spine bending unnaturally as though being tuned like an instrument. Each crack of bone aligned perfectly with the seismic clicks beneath their feet. The survivors scattered, some firing weapons into the sand, others fleeing toward dead vehicles. Gunfire vanished into empty air, muted by resonance. Samira clutched the seismometer feed, hands trembling. The clicks were coherent now. Structured like dialogue, but dialogue with the planet itself. Fault lines, bone marrow water tables, all being pressed, stressed, and catalogued. The entity was not talking to them. It was using them as syllables in a planetary language experiment. The desert lit up in the kind of firepower usually reserved for first strikes. Drone swarms poured in from 3 countries, black specks blotting the sky. Hypersonic missiles launched from offshore carriers, streaking in at Mach 7, contrails carving the upper atmosphere. Armored convoys advanced across dunes in staggered formation, rifles bristling, sensors screaming in redundant layers. Command believed brute force would settle it. The first wave never reached the target. At exactly 2.8 kilometers from the projected coordinates, the drones died. Not shot down, not jammed, erased. Mid-flight, they folded in on themselves like paper tossed into fire, not burning but collapsing into geometric fragments. Their telemetry feeds cut to static as if the sky itself had been redacted. Missiles followed. Dozens streaked downward, warheads primed to deliver megatons of precision destruction. They slowed mid-descent as if hitting syrup. Shock waves rippled across the sand long before detonation. Then the warheads fell apart, disassembling themselves into harmless shards, each screw, each circuit board separating into its constituent materials and raining uselessly across the dunes. Soldiers were next. Exosuits seized up, servo motors locked at grotesque angles. Men screamed as their bodies betrayed them, armor crushing ribs and pinning limbs. HUDs filled with recursive error messages that bloomed into fractals, repeating until text became meaningless geometry. 3 kilometers, Yusef whispered, watching feeds collapse. It's a perimeter. An exclusion zone. Survivors staggered back, but the damage didn't stop at machinery. Perception twisted. Samira's eyes caught it first, shadows that refused alignment. Objects stood one way, their silhouettes fell another, bent toward invisible light sources. Soldiers fired at targets that weren't there, phantoms stitched out of refracted afterimages. A tank gunner screamed as his own shadow rose from the sand, detaching, stretching tall across the dunes. He fired wildly until the suit locked and the tank convulsed inward, folding in like origami under unseen stress. Samira pressed her palms into her skull, trying to force her eyes into coherence. Instead she saw structures blooming from the sand, towers folding, collapsing, rebuilding in endless recursion. Impossible architectures sketched in grains of quartz, erased as fast as they formed. She bit her lip until it bled, too afraid to admit she saw it. The ground throbbed with resonance. Seismometers howled before cutting out entirely. Bodies bent at unnatural angles. Vehicles twisted as though some giant hand kneaded them into new shapes. The survivors who staggered free described not battle, not destruction, but distortion. Time lagged by seconds, voices desynchronized from mouths. Gunfire erupted after muzzles flashed. Soldiers moved one way while their shadows lagged, a half-second behind. Samira doubled over, heart pounding arrhythmically. She felt the silence compress around her, then stretch. Her own thoughts arrived delayed, as though echoing from someone else's skull. Yusef pulled her upright, eyes wide, blood seeping from his tear ducts. It's not targeting us. Don't you see? We're not even the variables. We're just collateral. It's calibrating something bigger. Samira blinked, teeth chattering. Beyond the haze, she thought she saw the entity. A silhouette, flickering in and out of alignment with itself, stepping through a reality she couldn't follow. And then it was gone again, leaving the battlefield littered with twisted machinery, broken men, and shadows that still hadn't caught up to their owners. They found it fused into the wreckage of a tank barrel, a sliver no larger than a handspan. At first it looked like slag, some heat-twisted residue. But when the recovery team tried to pry it loose, the steel surrendered instead. The shard came free without resistance, as if the tank had been sculpted around it. In the Riyadh forensics lab, the object refused categorization. It wasn't magnetic, didn't register as metal, ceramic, or composite. Gravimetrics placed its density at undefined. Spectroscopy failed. The beam scattered as though hitting a horizon. "It's not a fragment," Samira said, staring at the rotating holographic model. "It's a boundary. A fault line in reality frozen in place." Youssef's hand hovered over it, never quite touching. "A phase state that doesn't belong here. Like a splinter of different physics embedded in ours." Layla insisted on microscopy. Against Samira's protest, she lowered the shard into the electron scope. The lab fell into a low hum. The shard vibrated. Not visually, not mechanically. Instruments shifted of their own accord, clamps sliding across benches, glass beakers rotating centimeters without rolling. Monitors flickered with scrambled geometry, diagrams folding into recursive curves that erased themselves mid-frame. Layla gasped, clutched her head. Electrodes registered her brain screaming in overload. EEG waves matched perfectly with the seismic clicks recorded days earlier, identical patterns. She collapsed onto the floor, body twitching in arrhythmic pulses. The shard pulsed brighter, not visibly but locally. The room seemed to bow around it, edges skewing like camera distortion. "Kill power," Samira shouted. Youssef slammed the breakers. Darkness. The shard stopped. Instruments froze in their displaced positions, like chess pieces abandoned mid-game. Layla lay still. When Samira reached her, she was breathing. Pulse erratic but present. Her EEG, still recording on battery, displayed orderly clicks. No seizure noise. No human rhythm. Just seismic code. "She's synchronized," Samira whispered. And then Layla's eyes snapped open. Pupils blown wide, irises trembling as though refracting invisible light. She convulsed, mouth opening in a scream, but no sound emerged. The silence pressed into the lab like a hand clamping every throat. Glass shattered in concentric rings around her body. Instruments slid across the floor as if gravity had tilted sideways. The shard vibrated again, but only when her body twitched. It was coupling to her neural patterns. Testing her. Running her like a processor. Samira grabbed her shoulder, tried to haul her free, but the contact threw her backward as if repelled by a magnetic surge. Youssef fired a taser into the shard in panic. The probes hit, arcs sparking, and the taser dissolved. Not fried. Not broken. The weapon disassembled into springs and casing, each part scattering neatly across the floor. The shard pulsed one last time. Layla convulsed violently, then went limp. Everything stopped. Silence retreated. Lights returned. The shard lay inert on the bench. Harmless again. Samira staggered to her knees, staring at the inert sliver. It wasn't a relic. It wasn't a weapon. It was a probe, a test kit, a neural scalpel. It had measured her colleague. And for a moment, it had written its language directly into a human brain. The entity surfaced at dawn near Tabuk, bursting through a dune field in a slow-motion avalanche of sand and fractured basalt. It did not emerge like an animal breaching for air, but as though the earth itself had rotated to push it upward. The desert shook, ridges fracturing in a clean geometric lattice, each seam pointing north. Satellite footage caught its stride, every step aligned with tectonic lines, each pace a survey mark on the planet's crust. It wasn't random movement, wasn't migration. It was inspection. By midday, its trajectory was obvious. North toward the Mediterranean, hugging the Red Sea rift. The line matched precisely with global seismographic fault zones, as if it carried an atlas in reverse, studying Earth's stress points not as data but as living anatomy. Samira stared at the overlays on her monitor. "It's dissecting the planet," she said flatly. "Not us. The world itself. Like a surgeon palpating tissue for weaknesses." Governments did not share her calm. NATO scrambled air patrols. Turkish artillery massed along the Syrian border. Egyptian analysts predicted catastrophic collapse if the entity's march destabilized the Mediterranean fault lines. Rumors spread of planetary fracture, the idea that a wrong gesture could split continents. The United States proposed a tactical nuclear strike. Russia countered with orbital kinetic weapons. The Arab League pleaded for non-intervention, arguing every prior attack had only destabilized electronics and slaughtered the attackers themselves. Still, war machines gathered. The entity moved with relentless indifference. Fighter jets screamed low over the desert, loosing air-to-ground missiles. The warheads streaked down, only to elongate in midair, stretching like molten wax. They hit the sand in long, harmless ribbons. Armored convoys advanced, firing rail cannons. The shots bent sideways as though the air had density gradients no human physics accounted for. Tanks overturned without being touched, as if rolling downhill on invisible slopes. One drone swarm managed to dive close, hundreds of units spiraling toward its towering frame. For a moment, Samira thought they might land. Then the entire swarm froze, engines alive, wings stiff, caught in a pocket of skewed inertia. A second later they were released, but flung backwards in a spray of debris, as though the desert had exhaled. Samira's hallucinations intensified. Standing on the command ridge, she blinked against the sun, and the towering geometry of the entity shifted. She no longer saw machinery. It stood not as metal but as cartilage plated with translucent scales of shifting density. Its limbs flexed not with pistons but with a layered rhythm of musculature. Its head, if it could be called that, tilted, nostrils opening to inhale the seismic rhythms of the crust. It was not a machine at all. It was a surveyor, a planetary biologist dissecting the Earth with every step. Her chest tightened. A pressure on her lungs, her ribs. As if the planet itself were under the same palpation. At sunset, the ground convulsed. Not an earthquake, but an intentional gesture. The entity drove one limb deep into the desert floor. 4 kilometers around, sensors recorded instantaneous decompression in underground aquifers. Wells collapsed. Rock formations buckled. Whole villages reported geysers of steam bursting from dry soil. The act was surgical. A biopsy of the earth. The creature extracted its limb, fragments of molten quartz clinging like tissue samples. Samira whispered into her recorder, "It's evaluating load-bearing integrity. We are standing on something it does not recognize as alive, but as material. Earth is its patient. Or its cadaver." The shard pulsed faintly in the containment chamber, its surfaces not reflecting light but folding it inward. Samira sat alone, monitors blacked out around her. She had overridden the safeguards, sliding the fragment of frozen spacetime into a cradle of superconducting coils. She removed her headset and touched the shard with her bare fingers. The vibration was not tactile. It bypassed her skin, blooming inside her skull. Her vision shattered into layers. Desert, crust, mantle, the planet's innards rippling like organs under a scan. Then came the rhythm. The seismic syntax she had mapped for weeks didn't just sound like language. It was language, a survey protocol, a checklist written in the tremors of rock. Samira gasped. It was not colonization. Not invasion. Earth was being measured for replacement. Every continent, every tectonic fold, every subduction trench was data. The oceans were density samples, the atmosphere a calibration chamber. The entity wasn't a soldier. It wasn't even a visitor. It was an instrument. And humanity? Not even noise in the signal. Outside the facility, alarms shrieked. Turkish fighter jets had broken the no-fly zone, screaming over the Red Sea in a joint assault. Their missile bays opened, dozens of hypersonic projectiles lancing down. The entity did not move. Instead, Samira felt the adjustment before she saw it. Spacetime flexed like fabric being tugged. Every missile elongated into threads of vapor. The jets themselves spiraled, their wings bending in impossible geometries before snapping off. The sky filled with burning wreckage. Samira staggered, still locked to the shard. Through its resonance she was the entity, perceiving the carnage not as combat but as static interference. Like lint on a microscope lens. The door slammed open. Youssef stood there, face pale, eyes darting between Samira and the vibrating shard. "What have you done?" His voice broke. "You've let it inside." Samira turned toward him, her pupils dilated until her eyes were almost black. She saw not his body but the structural strain of his bones, the fluid dynamics of his blood, the pressure differentials in his lungs. "It was already here," she said softly. "We're just late in noticing." Youssef lunged, slamming his hand against the emergency cutoff. The chamber's shielding surged, sparks raining as the shard dimmed. Samira collapsed to her knees, still convulsing with the afterimage of planetary anatomy. Outside the ground quaked again. The entity had shifted direction, northwest, stepping into the Mediterranean fault line. The sea rolled violently as if displaced by a second tide. Samira dragged herself upright, whispering, "It's not hostile. It's not here for us. It's here for the Earth itself. And if we fail its criteria, it will mark this world unfit." At dawn, the Mediterranean was unnaturally still. No waves lapped the shore, no gulls wheeled overhead. The water shimmered with a glassy calm that suffocated sound. The entity reached the coast near Hackle, its towering frame dwarfing the port cranes and naval destroyers arrayed in defense. Tanks and artillery tracked it from the cliffs, but none fired. Orders had stalled somewhere between panic and futility. Samira stood with Youssef and Layla on an observation deck, their bodies rigid with exhaustion, their nerves rubbed raw. They watched the construct pause at the waterline, jointed limbs flexing as if reconsidering balance. Then, without a splash, it stepped into the sea. Gravity folded. The waves did not break, the surface tension did not yield. Instead, the Mediterranean bent around the entity as though water had become a lens. Entire freighters tilted as the tide pulled sideways, sucked toward the geometry of its descent. A Qatari corvette fired in desperation, missiles arced in only to twist midair, detonating harmlessly in the clouds. The soldiers abandoned their posts, some leaping into the water as the shoreline cracked like broken glass beneath their boots. The entity sank deeper. No wake. No whirlpool. Just absence. Seismic stations from Cairo to Istanbul went silent. The tremors that had haunted them for weeks cut off mid-cycle, as though a hand had lifted from the crust. Scientists stared at their instruments, bewildered, not a reduction but a removal. The Earth itself sounded muted, as if part of its geophysical voice had been deleted. Global satellites caught one last image, not a body, not a shape, but a void, an erasure moving west beneath the seafloor, gliding along the fault lines toward the Atlantic Trench. Radar painted nothing. Infrared saw nothing. But the absence was mapped by what the oceans refused to show. Samira's breath hitched. In the laboratory, she had kept herself tethered to the shard, and its residue still pulsed faintly through her skull. On her EEG, the seismic rhythms replayed in loops, like a heartbeat not her own. When she blinked, she no longer saw water or horizon. She saw pressure maps, density columns, invisible stress lines rippling across the crust. The world looked less like a planet than a specimen under glass. Layla clutched her arm. "Samira, are you still with us?" Samira did not answer. Because she knew. The entity's departure was not an ending. It was merely a line item in a greater ledger, a mark in a survey no human could hope to contest. The Mediterranean swallowed the last of the distortion. Fishermen's radios crackled back to life. Power grids hummed online. The world exhaled as though nothing had happened. But Samira kept her silence. She alone could still feel the rhythm beating inside her skull, the faint echo of alien arithmetic. It had measured Earth. It had measured them. And in its tally humanity was negligible. 3 months after the disappearance, the desert has gone quiet. Satellite feeds show nothing unusual, no voids moving under the oceans, no anomalous tremors. To official reports, the incident never happened. Governments filed it under equipment malfunction, foreign cyber interference, unexplained atmospheric distortions. Denial became policy. Uncertainty was too corrosive to admit. But the survivors remember. The veterans of the Tabuk exclusion zone refused to speak, their bodies healed while their shadows sometimes hesitate before following. Some burn in silence when asked, others stammer into tears. Entire divisions were dissolved quietly, their names scrubbed from records. Samira no longer sleeps normally. EEG scans still hum with faint seismic echoes, and her dreams unfold in split layers. One world she walks in daylight, another constructed of recursive structures made of sand, glass, and starlight. She hides her bleeding gums with tight smiles, her trembling hands in her coat pockets. When asked by reporters, she insists she's fine. She knows otherwise. Sometimes she catches herself standing before mirrors, her reflection delayed as though waiting for permission to follow. And late at night, she feels pressure in her skull, distant, rhythmic. Not the original entity but something else. The cadence is different. A new geometry. A new measurement. Across the globe, seismographs whisper of anomalies. Faint, synchronized tremors registering in Chile, Kamchatka, the mid-Atlantic. Subduction zones ringing faintly, as if tuned strings plucked by unseen hands. Samira keeps this to herself. Because if she says it aloud, it will become real. And she already knows the truth, the first was never alone.